What if there was a way to work out the right thing to do, like a tool that could tell you exactly how to behave in any situation? Imagine if there was a simple formula for morality, a way to calculate what's right and wrong. This was exactly what Jeremy Bentham, the 18th century English philosopher, tried to create with his idea of the hedonic calculus. Bentham is the father of utilitarianism, a moral theory that says actions are right or wrong based on their consequences. Specifically, if an action produces more happiness or pleasure, it's good. If it results in pain or misery, it's bad. For Bentham, the measure of right and wrong is simple. It is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong. So, if you think about it, Robin Hood's actions would be moral, stealing from the rich to help the poor. But Butch Cassidy? Not so much. The Second World War for the Allies was seen as a good cause, while the conquests of Genghis Khan were not. Killing one person to save 10? Good. Starting a war over a stolen princess? Bad. But there's one major challenge: how can we ever be sure of the net outcome of our actions? How can we know what will bring about the most happiness or minimize misery? Bentham's answer: the hedonic calculus. This tool, as Bentham proposed, helps us calculate the pleasure and pain of every action by looking at 7 factors: intensity, duration, likelihood, proximity, fecundity. Will it create more pleasure? Purity. Will it lead to more pain? And extent. The more we understand these factors and the consequences of our actions, the better our judgment will be. So, imagine you've got this hedonic calculator in hand. You tally up the pleasures and pains, add them up, and voila! You know exactly what to do. It's morality for the mathematical age, ethics made simple and rational. No more worrying about what's right or wrong. But here's the catch: you might need a few hours to work it all out. After all, calculating the consequences of every action can be time-consuming. We all want to do the right thing at the right time. We strive to be virtuous. But how can we know what's truly the right thing to do in any given situation? If I want to be brave, how can I avoid being reckless? If I aim to be polite, how do I steer clear of being overly shy? And when does confidence cross the line into arrogance? When does generosity become condescension? Aristotle, Plato's student, tackled this question in his work Nicomachean Ethics. His solution? The golden mean. Aristotle believed that ethical actions, or doing the right thing, all come down to being virtuous. By practicing, repeating, and imitating virtuous people, we can train ourselves to become better at any virtue. Want to be kind? Do kind things regularly. Want to be forgiving? Copy someone who is forgiving. As Aristotle famously put it, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. But here's the challenge. It's not always clear what the virtuous action is in each situation. Every moral decision is unique. What was brave in one situation might be reckless in another. What was kind yesterday might be cruel today. So, how do we figure it out? Aristotle said the virtuous action is the middle ground between 2 extremes. The golden mean lies between excess and deficiency. Courage is the balance between recklessness and cowardice. Politeness is the middle ground between being too quiet and too talkative. Generosity isn't stinginess, nor is it extravagance. As the poet Hesiod said, moderation in all things. Finding this golden mean isn't easy. It requires practice, experience, and wisdom. Aristotle called this wisdom phronesis, the practical knowledge gained through experience. Like a muscle, the more we practice virtue, the more naturally we'll know how to act in each situation. Over time, we'll learn the balance and become the perfect moral citizens able to navigate life's choices with ease. And maybe, just maybe, one day, others will look at us and strive to be as virtuous as we've become. Imagine you're walking down a quiet street when you bump into a strange, snaggle-toothed crone. She hands you a small, mysterious ring. "It's a gift," she says, her eyes glinting. "The ring," she explains, "has the power to make you completely invisible. No one will see you, no one will know you're there. What would you do? How would you use this power?" This thought experiment comes from Plato's Republic, introduced by a character named Glaucon. In the story, A man named Gyges finds a similar ring, and once he becomes invisible, he's tempted to commit crimes, steal, trespass, and even murder. Glaucon argues that anyone with this power would immediately use it for personal gain, casting aside morality, laws, and decency. According to him, the only thing keeping us from acting on our darker impulses is the fear of being caught. If you had the ring, would you really not take advantage of it? Would you resist stealing or breaking into places you shouldn't? We all have fantasies about power and freedom, but would you act on them if there were no consequences? Plato's point is chilling. Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. The ring of Gyges shows us that deep inside, we all have a potential tyrant. Our conscience, society's rules, and the judgment of others are what keep us in line. Think about today's world, politicians, business tycoons, and powerful leaders. Are they really any different from Gyges? Do they too hide behind the veil of societal norms while engaging in shady deals, hidden agendas, and lies? The story of the ring of Gyges forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. It's not power that corrupts, it's the lack of accountability. Without checks and balances, without transparency, even the most just of us could fall victim to temptation. So, ask yourself, if you had the power to be invisible, what would you do? Would you remain righteous, or would you give in to the temptation of absolute freedom? What if everyone in the world behaved just like you? Would that be a world full of kindness, happiness, and harmony, or would it be one you'd hate to live in? What if every small action you took became the rule for everyone? How would it change the way you act? This is the heart of Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, one of the most influential ideas in ethics, and it starts with a simple question: what if everyone did that? Kant believed there's an absolute moral law that we all have the capacity to access, and that we can discover it through reason, not our passions, emotions, or instincts. To be moral, he argued, is to use reason to guide us to our duties in life. In any situation, we're faced with different maxims, rules, or principles for how to behave. But it's reason that helps us decide which of these maxims should become universal laws or duties. Kant's famous first formulation of the categorical imperative is all about asking, what if everyone did that? Let's say, for example, the maxim is lie if you want to. What happens if everyone adopts that rule? Well, the very idea of truth would collapse. If everyone lied, lies would become so common that truth would lose its meaning. The act of lying would be self-destructive. Similarly, if everyone broke quarantine during a pandemic, the idea of quarantine would cease to exist entirely. In this way, Kant argues, some actions like lying or breaking quarantine become impossible to justify when you ask, what if everyone did that? These are what Kant calls perfect duties, rules that must be followed because they hold up when applied universally. But there are also imperfect duties which aren't as logically necessary. For example, there's no logical contradiction in a world where no one helps others, but if everyone followed that maxim, we'd have a bleak, miserable existence. Imperfect duties are guided more by our preferences and desires, and while they don't self-destruct, they still shape a better world when followed. So, what's the takeaway? The next time you're faced with a moral decision, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what if everyone did this? Kant's simple tool can help you make decisions that align with universal morality. What's the point of doing a nice thing if you can't flaunt it on social media? Why be charitable if there's no one around to praise you? If you do something kind, make sure someone's watching. Welcome to the world of Ayn Rand's rational egoism, where the only person you need to worry about is yourself. Ayn Rand, the Russian-born philosopher of the 20th century, argued that it's not only natural but rational for humans to prioritize their own self-interest. According to Rand, every action, relationship, or desire should be judged by how much it benefits you, the individual. The greater something satisfies your self-interest, the more motivated you should be to act. Think about it. If you donate to charity, it's because it makes you look good to your friends. If you help your neighbor fix his fence, it's because you might need his help down the road. If you marry, it's for the security, happiness, or children you desire. Every action is a calculated decision. What benefits you in that situation? Rand's rational egoism views every interaction through the lens of what it does for you. If an action makes your life worse, it's irrational to follow through. Sacrificing your well-being for others unless you're suicidal is never appropriate. In Rand's world, every interaction is like a contract between rational parties, each working to maximize their own benefits. And sometimes, surprisingly, these contracts can still benefit both parties. Now, Rand isn't saying we're all heartless. She acknowledged that you have to be psychopathic not to feel some moral impulse to help a suffering dog or person. However, she argued that this impulse arises from a generalized sense of what goes around comes around. Helping others benefits us in the long run because when we all help each other, we all thrive. It's almost like a karmic self-interest, what Epicurus would agree with. So, the next time someone asks you to sacrifice for the greater good, ask yourself, why? What's rational about putting yourself second? Why would any intelligent person abandon their own self-interest? It's Christmas and you're rummaging through the kitchen when you spot the box of posh chocolates. There's one left. Your favorite. But wait, everyone else likes that one too. In that moment, your entire being becomes a battleground between egoism and altruism. Which will win? Will you take the chocolate? For French philosopher Auguste Comte, who coined the word altruism, the answer is clear. You must intentionally assert your mind to override your natural egoism. Altruism can win, but only if we train it, strengthen it, and make it a habit. Comte believed that human nature is deeply egoistic. Our natural state, he argued, is to look after ourselves and satisfy our own desires. This aligns with what we now call evolutionary psychology, the idea that we are driven by powerful biological forces to be self-centered. But Comte didn't think we were doomed by these instincts. We have incredible minds capable of transcending any genetic fatalism. In other words, we are constantly at war between individualism, the me mindset, and collectivism, the us mindset, where we look after each other. To win this battle, we can train ourselves to be more other-regarding. We already practice this in small, everyday gestures. For example, we hold the door open for others, not because it benefits us, but because it helps someone else. This small act of kindness requires no reward for us, yet it's so ingrained in us that it becomes almost mindless. For Comte, these small acts of altruism are essential to living a fulfilled life. He believed that true happiness comes from transcending selfish desires and focusing on the well-being of others. An egoist, he argued, who loves only themselves is trapped in a cycle of uncontrollable excitement, always wanting more, never satisfied. But true contentment lies in denying that self-centered drive and living for others. So, when you're debating whether to take that last piece of chocolate, remember, you're more than your biology. You're capable of rising above instinct. Altruism isn't just a nice idea, it's a path to deeper happiness and fulfillment. Two people stand in court facing charges that seem morally different yet deeply similar. The first person fired a gun as a joke. The bullet ricocheted off a building, tragically killing her friend. The second person followed his ex-girlfriend home and took a wild shot at her. He missed, then decided to abandon his plan. So, who should be punished more? Does the first person deserve life in prison for a bizarre and unlucky event? Does the second person get off lightly because he didn't act on his harmful intent? This is the kind of moral dilemma that concerned the 12th century philosopher and poet Peter Abelard. In Abelard's time, the church wielded immense moral authority, believing actions were always right or wrong, regardless of intent. Murder, incest, theft, these actions were wrong no matter what the circumstances. Abelard thought this view was overly simplistic and often unjust. He argued that the moral worth of an action depends entirely on the intentions behind it. He uses the example of two siblings separated at birth who, years later, unknowingly fall in love. For Abelard, their actions were not sinful as they were ignorant of their relationship. But for the church, they were damned. This distinction between what you do and why you do it was revolutionary for his time. Abelard even took controversial stances. He argued that sex was not inherently sinful, contrary to the church's rigid stance. If pleasure in marriage was acceptable but outside of it became sinful, then it wasn't the act itself that mattered but the intention behind it. Even more daring, Abelard suggested that those who killed Christ were not morally blameworthy because they were ignorant of his divinity. Jesus himself, at the end, says, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." This argument challenges modern notions of guilt and responsibility. How can we be sure of someone's intentions? A murderer would hardly admit to premeditation. Abelard's response: God will know. But that's hardly sufficient in today's secular world where courts must weigh evidence, character studies, and the plausibility of situations, all while acknowledging the limits of human knowledge. And what about ignorance versus negligence? Can someone really claim "I didn't know guns were dangerous" as a valid defense? How much should we expect people to know about the potential consequences of their actions? Despite these challenges, Abelard's contributions to ethics and law were groundbreaking. He was a rational voice in an era steeped in superstition, laying the groundwork for much of modern ethical thinking and secular law. Today, we continue to grapple with these questions of intention, negligence, and moral accountability, standing on the shoulders of Abelard's ideas. Equality, it's the greatest lie we tell ourselves. We like to claim that we treat everyone the same, that everyone is equal, yet on a daily basis we all discriminate and show bias. What's worse, we often don't even think it's wrong. Ask yourself these questions. If you had to choose, who would you save, your mom or a stranger? Who would you leave your inheritance to? Why is it that you donate a kidney to your child but not to someone you don't know? In these moments, we rank some people higher than others and reward them unequally. What is this if not discrimination? This moral dilemma concerned Australian philosopher Peter Singer, who introduced the concept of the expanding circle in his 1981 book of the same name. Singer aimed to address the clear immorality of discriminating in favor of friends and family, a practice we often accept without question. Richard Dawkins, in his 1976 book The Selfish Gene, explains that our bias towards those we care about is natural, driven by evolutionary psychology to protect our genes and the genes of our families. According to Dawkins, our circle of altruism is narrow, and we limit our actions to those that serve an evolutionary purpose. Though he doesn't argue that we should always follow our evolutionary instincts, Dawkins acknowledges that this behavior is natural and, in some ways, sensible. But Singer disagrees. He argues that just because something might be a biological or evolutionary fact doesn't make it moral. A fact doesn't automatically translate to a duty. You cannot get an ought from an is. Instead, Singer contends that humans are more than just creatures driven by biology. We have the unique capacity for rationality. Focusing only on evolutionary psychology ignores our human potential to think and reason beyond basic instincts. Throughout history, humans have used reason to expand our circles of care. First, we cared for our immediate families. Then, the tribe. Next, the country. Singer asks, why not the world? With reason and morality, we can adopt values that respect the dignity and worth of all humans, regardless of their genetic connections. This idea resonates with thinkers like Gandhi, who believed in expanding our circles of empathy. Singer argues that we can all widen our empathetic circle. By turning our sociobiological tendencies into true altruism, we can care for more and eventually all humans. For Singer, ethics isn't about rationality versus emotion. Instead, rationality builds on and extends our natural compassion, pushing our care outward to include more people. So, are you wrong for favoring your brother over a stranger? Is it inherently bad to leave money to your own children? It might be natural, but does that make it right? Imagine you're having dinner with colleagues when someone snaps their fingers and calls out, "Garçon, over here." Or picture a person leaving a taxi, never saying hello, goodbye, or thank you to the driver. Perhaps think of a kidnapper demanding $1 million in ransom for a small child, or a government executing a traitor to prevent rebellion. What do all these actions have in common? For Immanuel Kant, they all share one critical flaw: they treat a human being as merely a means to an end, and that, for Kant, is always wrong. Kant was deeply fascinated by human rationality. For him, it was the single greatest asset we possess. The best thing about our rationality is that it enables us to understand what's right and wrong. We've already seen how Kant's first formulation of the categorical imperative was grounded in reason. His second formulation, however, takes this a step further. It demands that we treat every person as an end in themselves, not just a tool to achieve our own goals. For Kant, human beings have an unconditional dignity simply because we are rational. And because of that, we must always behave in a way that respects this dignity. He argued, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. People are not tools to be used or pawns in our schemes. They have their own intrinsic value. Kant believed that we each subjectively value our own existence as the center of our world. I am important, and you are too. Since everyone sees themselves as valuable, we can universally claim that everyone deserves that same respect. Of course, Kant wasn't naive. Society depends on helping, serving, and working for each other. But his rule was clear: we should never only treat others as a means to an end. When we interact with people, whether it's a waiter, a taxi driver, or even a criminal, we must recognize their humanity. Each person holds value in and of themselves. Kant, in his personal life, exemplified this by treating his manservant, Lampy, with great dignity and even including him in his will. So, the next time you're unsure how to treat someone, ask yourself, am I respecting this person for their humanity, or am I using them as a tool to get what I want? It's a simple but powerful question, one that can guide you in all your interactions. When is it justified for a country to go to war? Under what circumstances can the use of force be morally acceptable? Why do many consider the Spanish conquest of the New World to be wrong, while D-Day is hailed as an act of heroism? These are questions that have plagued thinkers for centuries, and in the 13th century, the Italian scholar St. Thomas Aquinas turned his mind to just such dilemmas. Aquinas is widely regarded as one of the major figures in developing the concept of jus ad bellum, the principles for just war. Building upon Augustine's earlier work, Aquinas set out three key criteria in his Summa Theologica to determine if a war is morally justifiable: authorization by a legitimate authority. Aquinas argued that a war must be declared by the authority of the prince or a recognized state and not based on private ambition. For example, the 1757 battle at Plassey, fought by the East India Company against native Bengalis, was unjust because it was driven by the company's profit motives, not by the authority of a legitimate state. A just cause, a war must be waged in the interests of justice against those who have committed wrongdoing. This means fighting only against those who truly deserve to be attacked. The NATO intervention in Bosnia after the Srebrenica massacre is an example of a just war, as it was a humanitarian intervention aimed at stopping further atrocities. Right intention and proportionality. Aquinas believed that a war should be fought with the goal of promoting good or avoiding evil. The use of force should be minimal with the intention to resolve conflicts and restore peace. For example, the massacre of the city of Béziers during the Albigensian Crusade in 1209, where the general Arnaud Amalric commanded, "Kill them all, God will know his own," was a grievous act that violated Aquinas' principles. Today, we rarely hear about a just war, but rather about legitimate force, and many modern pro-war arguments are framed using principles similar to Aquinas' criteria. The United Nations defines a just war more narrowly in Article 51 of the UN Charter, asserting that war is justified only in self-defense and never as an act of active aggression. But is this definition too narrow? Are there ever situations where military intervention or war is justified, or should war only be used as a last resort, as the UN suggests? These are questions that continue to spark debate. Can military force be used to right wrongs, or should we hold to the idea that war is only justifiable for self-defense? Aquinas' framework offers a foundation for thinking about these issues, but in our modern world, we must ask, when, if ever, is war truly just? What do you think future generations will judge us for? Will our grandchildren be shocked when we tell stories about how we live today? Will they ask, "Grandma, why did no one say it was wrong?" about certain practices that seem normal to us now? One area that philosopher Peter Singer believes future generations will judge us for is how we treat other animals and the hypocrisy we often display in doing so. Singer challenges us to examine our beliefs about animals and question why we assume humans are worth more than animals. He introduces the concept of speciesism, a term he popularized in the 1970s, which he defines as the attitude of bias in favor of the interests of members of one's own species and against those of members of other species. Like all forms of discrimination, speciesism is perpetuated by custom and the failure to critically reflect on our beliefs. Singer is careful to clarify that he's not suggesting all life is of equal worth. For example, he values self-awareness and does not treat all forms of life identically. However, he argues that the experience of pain and the will to live are shared across species. Any ethical theory that weighs the pros and cons of an action's consequences should consider the interests of all species, not just humans. Singer's views on speciesism align with his utilitarian philosophy, which weighs actions based on their consequences, specifically, the balance of pain versus pleasure. He contends that moral decisions should not only consider humanity but also the impact on animals, plants, and nature. Why should only human pleasure factor into the equation? We're beginning to move closer to Singer's perspective. Many people today view blood sports like bullfighting or dogfighting as immoral. Animal suffering should not be inflicted simply to entertain or please humans. Yet, despite this shift, many still believe that the pleasure derived from eating a steak justifies the suffering of a cow. Singer asks, what moral justification can we use to condemn bear baiting while accepting battery farming? Even more controversially, Singer argues that speciesism is a deeply ingrained and outdated prejudice, one that future generations will look back on with the same disgust we now reserve for racism and sexism. If we have no justification other than tradition and bias for the mistreatment of sentient beings capable of feeling pain and forming relationships, should we continue to perpetuate this practice? These are tough questions, but they're worth asking. What are we doing and why? Have you ever wondered what you would have done had you been born in Nazi Germany? Deep down, do you think you'd have been any different from the others? Have you ever done something wrong, big or small, just because you were told to do it or simply to fit in? What would you be capable of if you were given a uniform, a title, and free rein? These are the questions that have haunted philosophers and psychologists for decades. After the horrors of World War II, many social psychologists sought to understand how a cultured and intellectual society like Germany could so quickly turn to evil. Could it happen to anyone? Could it happen to you? In 1971, American psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted his famous Stanford prison experiment to explore these very questions. 75 adult men were placed into a simulated prison environment with 24 assigned to be guards and the rest to be prisoners. What followed was a shocking turn of events. What was supposed to be a 2-week study was abandoned after just 6 days, as the guards became increasingly authoritarian, brutal, and cruel. Zimbardo reported that a third of the guards exhibited sadistic traits. Zimbardo's experiment is often cited as proof that our morals are fragile and can be stretched by social pressures. It suggested that, given a uniform, a role, and the permission to act without consequence, any of us could become perpetrators of evil. Zimbardo argued that we tend to overestimate the role of individual character and underestimate the influence of social context. The guards at Auschwitz, he said, were likely not born evil. They were shaped by their environment. However, the experiment has been heavily criticized over the years. Critics argue that Zimbardo himself played an active role in encouraging the guards to escalate their cruelty. He even adopted an evil overseer role, providing the guards with mirrored aviator sunglasses similar to the ones worn by sadistic characters in popular films. The situation grew so out of control that it took a concerned intervention from his research partner, Christina Maslach, to stop the experiment. There's also the issue of whether all the guards truly exhibited sadistic behavior. The worst actions came from a single guard, Dave Eshelman, who admitted to playing up his role to give the researchers something to study. The others were likely more guilty of the bystander effect, passively watching rather than actively engaging in cruelty. Despite these criticisms, the Stanford prison experiment raises crucial questions. If we reflect honestly, how far do we really think our morals would stretch if we were placed in an unassailable position of power? Would we, like the guards, take advantage of our authority and abandon our values, or would we resist?
The answers aren't easy, but they're worth considering. What would you do if you had the power? Is it morally wrong to hold certain beliefs even if those beliefs are repellent or harmful? Are we accountable only for our actions, or do we have moral duties to think in certain ways? These are the questions English philosopher W.K. Clifford tackled in his 1877 essay The Ethics of Belief. Clifford believed we have epistemic duties, responsibilities to hold beliefs that are supported by sufficient evidence. To understand his position, imagine this story. A shipowner is selling tickets for a once-in-a-lifetime journey. He has a hunch that his ship might not be as safe as it should be, but repairing it would be costly. He decides to ignore his doubts to avoid the expense and keep ticket sales high. He asks no more questions. Is he morally responsible for the potential harm that could result? Clifford would argue, yes. He believed it was wrong for anyone to believe anything without sufficient evidence.
The shipowner failed in his epistemic duty by not investigating the safety of his ship. Whether the journey turns out to be safe or tragic, the wrong was in his failure to seek the truth. Clifford's principle of evidentialism holds that we are morally responsible for our beliefs, and we must not avoid, distort, or ignore evidence that challenges them. A racist, for example, is immoral not only because of their actions but because they failed to critically examine their beliefs. Willful ignorance is always wrong. This idea extends to many modern issues: flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, and astrologers. According to Clifford, they are immoral because they didn't make an effort to seek out and consider evidence. They ignored their epistemic duty to believe based on evidence. But Clifford's ideas raise complex questions. Who decides what counts as adequate evidence? We all have biases that affect how we perceive evidence.
How much do we account for someone's intentions? And why are beliefs considered ethical issues in the first place? Clifford's arguments force us to confront the moral weight of our beliefs. Are we morally accountable for the views we hold? And if so, who determines what's acceptable? Imagine stepping back, looking at yourself reading this book. Now zoom out further. See the building you're in, then the city, then the landscape stretching beyond. Keep zooming out and soon you're looking at the Earth itself, floating in the vastness of space. Now stay there with this new perspective, as British scientist James Lovelock invites us to do in his Gaia hypothesis. Lovelock asks us to reconsider our place in the grand scheme of things. What if we're not special at all? What if we're just one small part of a massive, interconnected ecosystem? Over billions of years of life, humans might be like a passing gut bacterium to the planet. This is the heart of the Gaia hypothesis, that the Earth itself functions as a living, self-regulating system. Just as the body has feedback loops to maintain balance, so too does the Earth. It regulates temperatures, ocean salinity, oxygen levels, and more, ensuring that life continues to thrive. While ecosystems and weather systems might seem incredibly complex to us, to Gaia, they're simply part of the natural management of life. Gaia doesn't see us as important or special, it's more concerned with maintaining the balance of the entire system. This idea isn't as mystical as it might sound. Lovelock's Gaia principle aligns with the concept of coevolution, where ecosystems and species evolve together. Eagles evolve to hunt, while rabbits evolve to reproduce quickly. Cows evolve to eat grass, and grass evolves to survive digestion. This view sees the Earth as a living organism, with species acting like its microbes or organs. To Gaia, humans are no more important than any other species. There are two potential implications of this view. First, we might be a fatal pathogen to Gaia, like a cancer or virus. Our climate destruction and carbon emissions may have fatally wounded the planet, making it slow and sick. Alternatively,
Gaia may simply expunge humanity, just as it has done with previous diseases. The world may become uninhabitable for humans, but life will find a way, as Jurassic Park tells us. The Earth will continue long after our factories and nuclear weapons rust away at the bottom of oceans. Either way, the Gaia hypothesis forces us to confront the possibility that we are neither special nor irreplaceable in the grand scheme of things. It's a concept that challenges our egocentric view of the world and makes us question our role on this planet. It's a provocative idea, both optimistic and terrifying in its implications. How many times have you blamed someone or something for your own actions? How often do you find yourself saying, if it weren't for that, I'd be doing this? Do you resent your boss, your teacher, your parents, or your friends for making you do something? The 20th century French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre recognized these feelings and labeled them as bad faith or mauvaise foi if you want to sound sophisticated. Sartre believed that we often deceive ourselves, convincing ourselves that we don't have a choice in the matter when in reality we always do. Having choice isn't always easy. It comes with responsibility, expectation, and the pressure of knowing that our decisions impact everything. It's far easier to be told what to do than to make decisions ourselves. Sartre argued that, as a result, we often create rules, stories, and social structures specifically designed to take away our freedom and avoid the weight of choice. These rules might be informal, like the social norm of don't text back immediately, or formal, like laws that say do not steal. Bad faith emerges when we hide our complicity with these structures, when we pretend that external rules or societal expectations make us do something. Sartre argues that no rule or norm can force us to act. Ultimately, the choice is ours. Every moment of every day demands a decision. We are always free and nothing can take that freedom away. Sartre even said we are condemned to be free. To avoid bad faith means making a radical mental shift. You might not like school, but remember, you've chosen to be there. You might be frustrated about a speeding ticket, but you chose to speed. You might be angry with your rude friend, but you chose to keep that person in your life. In each case, it is you who made the choice, and with every choice comes its consequences. Bad faith is the denial of our own responsibility. It's a cowardly retreat from owning our choices and rejecting our existential self. It's easier to go along with the flow and blame external factors, but in doing so, we reject the freedom that defines us. So, the next time you're angry, frustrated, or upset, remember this: you are angry at yourself. You made the choice, and you must deal with the consequences. You chose this moment. You chose this life. We all daydream about that one action, that one bold move that could completely change our life. It's the fantasy of a punch, a scream, a leap, a phone call, a confession. A moment that feels like it would flip everything upside down. A path chosen with no return. This feeling is called l'appel du vide, or the appeal of the void. And it's the perfect gateway into existentialism, the philosophy of choice and authenticity. Soren Kierkegaard, a foundational existential thinker, argued that humans are both terrified and exhilarated by the power we have over ourselves. Jean-Paul Sartre took this further, suggesting that we long for non-being, a mindless, robotic state where we don't have to make choices. Because with choice comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes anxiety and pressure. When we make choices, we know that we can't blame anyone else if things go wrong. L'appel du vide is the feeling that arises in those rare moments when we realize just how responsible we are for ourselves, how incredibly powerful our actions are. It's not an everyday emotion, but when it hits, it's profound. It might be the bolt of panic you feel when a speeding train rushes by, or the dizzying rush you get standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down. It's those dark, unspeakable thoughts you've only ever had in the quiet of your own mind. But it's also that lightness, the sudden urge to scream in a quiet library. L'appel du vide is that voice deep inside you, telling you, you could do it. It's the odd, unsettling realization that you don't entirely trust yourself not to do something reckless. You know all the reasons not to act, but that part of your mind questions whether those reasons are enough. There's nothing in the universe, no law, no authority, no divine being, that will step in and stop you. It's all up to you, and that's a terrifying thought. Now, let me be clear, this isn't about suicidal or destructive urges. Quite the opposite. L'appel du vide is about feeling the immense power of choice, the weight of possibility. It's realizing that, with a single action, you have the potential to change everything. You are the master of your own universe. A small, fleeting action could send ripples that change the course of your life. With that realization, you return to the everyday empowered, ready to act. You carry the weight of choice with you, knowing that you alone can decide the direction of your life.
Life is hard. It's filled with worries, anxieties, fears, and those monsters lurking in our minds. We get bogged down by the small things that seem so big in the moment. But how can we brush them all away? How can we see these concerns for what they truly are, small, fleeting distractions? Philosophy offers a powerful tool, memento mori. Memento mori, which literally translates to death memory, is a reminder to keep our mortality close. It's a simple but effective tool to help us put our worries in perspective. When you realize that you will die one day, it becomes easier to ask, does all this really matter? The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a central figure in Stoicism, embraced this idea. He viewed death as a natural and inevitable part of life, and by reflecting on it regularly, he found peace. In doing so, he removed the anxiety that comes from hoarding possessions, chasing wealth, or clinging to things that are ultimately fleeting.
All of it will one day turn to dust, so why waste our precious time worrying? The concept of memento mori dates back centuries. Ancient Egyptian banquets featured mummified corpses to remind guests, eat, drink, and be merry, for you'll soon be like this. This sentiment echoes in the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, reminding us of the brevity of life. Michel de Montaigne, the French Renaissance philosopher, was particularly fond of memento mori. He suggested that we live as close to graveyards as possible, and wrote, "Let us deprive death of its strangeness. Let us get used to it." For Montaigne, reflecting on death wasn't about fixating on it, but rather about learning to live more fully. By keeping death close, we learn to value life. In the Middle Ages and Renaissance, people often carried trinkets featuring the Grim Reaper, a skull, or a corpse, reminders of death so that life could be sweeter, richer. The more we remember our mortality, the more we appreciate the fleeting beauty of life. Now, try this for yourself. Think about the moment you will die. Reflect on the when, the why, the where, and the how. Imagine the fear, the loneliness, the unknown. Picture the loved ones who will be by your side and those you will leave behind. Pause and consider this. If you reflect on your inevitable death enough, all those little worries begin to shrink. Does it matter what your boss thinks? Does it matter if someone said something hurtful? Why are you upset with someone you love? Life is a brief flicker of light in the eternal darkness of time. Memento mori asks us to trivialize the trivial so we can value what truly matters.
When are you going to snap? When will the relentless grind of life, the misery, the monotony, the hollow pleasantries finally get to you? This is your life, your only life, and you're wasting it by being meek, servile, and boring. Is this really what millions of years of evolution have led to? This is the harsh reality Friedrich Nietzsche came to see in the late 19th century. He viewed modern life as a regression, a hollow, whimpering shadow of what humanity once was. At the core of all life, he argued, is a desire for power. Biologically, there's a Darwinian struggle to pass on our genes, but more deeply, the instinct to control, dominate, and get what we want is universal. This is true for tree roots pushing through concrete and for a stag fighting a rival. And it's true for us. Power, nobility, and strength used to be celebrated, admired, and idolized. We were once fearless Spartans, proud samurai, and bold Norse warriors. We wrote epics about heroes, conquerors, and giants. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of our noble selves.
humanity became infected by several insidious diseases: modesty, compassion, pity. The humble, the weak, and the beggar were suddenly elevated to sainthood. To be wrathful, proud, and strong became sins. Out went the mighty Thor and the courageous Hercules. In came the humble son of a Nazarene carpenter who died humiliated on a cross. For Nietzsche, this shift represented a denial of life's very essence. It's a will to nothingness, a force that goes against the core driving power of nature, the will to power. We've made strength a sin, and now our will to power turns inward. We're forbidden to dominate others, so our own will consumes itself in guilt and conscience. Humanity tortures itself, repressing what it means to truly live. We become like a wild wolf, bound and muzzled, rubbing itself raw against the bars of its cage. Nietzsche saw this as a mortal condition. The answer? We must reclaim our primal instincts, reaffirming power and nobility. We must restore our strength and boldly live again, unashamedly, unapologetically. This is the will to power. Dracula celebrates his 400th birthday as he always does, by lying in his coffin, staring blankly at the ceiling, utterly listless. What's the point of getting up? He's composed great symphonies, painted masterpieces, defeated countless heroes, and loved all the Helens of the ages. He's met every notable figure and tasted every kind of human experience. But now, what's the point? Every day feels meaningless when there's no end in sight. This is the problem that the 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger would point out. Dracula, in his eternal existence, lacks authenticity. Heidegger argued that one of the most crucial aspects of being human is something we too often avoid: our mortality. We spend so much of our lives hiding from death, distracted by routines and fairy tales that keep us from acknowledging the one undeniable fact: we are going to die. Heidegger believed we've done a tremendous job of shielding ourselves from the reality of death. Fairy tales end with happily ever after, completely stripped of mortality. We have hospitals, hospices, and shadowy spaces where we keep death hidden from view. Few of us have seen a corpse and hardly anyone talks about it openly. We bury our heads in distractions, avoiding the very thing that defines us. Don't be morbid, we say, but by ignoring death, Heidegger argued, we live inauthentically. For Heidegger, death is not just a dark thought to fear, but an essential truth that makes our choices meaningful. If we live as if we are immortal, we live without fully acknowledging the weight of our decisions. Every choice we make commits us to a particular path, and there's no turning back. Without confronting death, we never experience life in its fullness. Just like Dracula, whose immortality makes every moment feel flat, we too can become numb if we ignore the finite nature of our existence. The mortal mind isn't meant to deal with immortality. Pretending we are eternal by avoiding the reality of our eventual death is to live inauthentically. This way of living denies meaning and responsibility. We need the anchors of time and death to make our lives matter. Without them, we become alienated from ourselves. To face death is to bring purpose to everything we do. Heidegger reminds us that the beauty of a sunset lies in its fading, the poignancy of love in its end, and the ticking of the clock that drives us to dream. The choices you make today will be the only ones you'll ever make. So make them count. What is it that drives us? What pushes us forward, even through the boredom, misery, and suffering? What stubborn impulse keeps us going, longing to leave our mark on the world or dreaming of doing so? We all have it. Aside from the seriously ill or suicidal, there's a primal, deep urge within us all to keep going, as Winston Churchill put it, to keep buggering on. This force, this restless drive, is what the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer referred to as the will. For Schopenhauer, the will is the very engine of life, but also its greatest misery. Writing in the 19th century, Schopenhauer followed the ideas of Immanuel Kant, agreeing that the world is not simply as we see it, but rather a representation we've created. However, Schopenhauer took it further. While Kant was uncertain about the true nature of reality, Schopenhauer believed that the fundamental force driving everything in the universe is the will. The will is an animating, restless force, a constant, aimless striving. It's the desire to have, to control, to dominate, to understand. Everything in the universe, from animals with their hunger and instincts to natural forces like rivers eroding cliffs or meteors crashing to Earth, is driven by this will. Even the smallest, simplest forces have it. For Schopenhauer, this was the essence of everything, the will that animates and propels the universe. The problem, however, is that the will is never satisfied. It's like a virus, constantly hungry for more, growing without end. The nature of the will is to never be content, so we're constantly stuck in a cycle of wanting something new or, on the other side, feeling bored and listless, lacking motivation. We either relentlessly desire something unattainable like Tantalus forever reaching for fruit, or we struggle with apathy, unable to find anything that satisfies us. But here's the kicker: to stop striving is, in some ways, to cease being human. We are designed to move forward. If we stop, if we cease to strive, we cease to be who we are. So, we find ourselves caught between two extremes. Either we're consumed by an insatiable desire or we're paralyzed by a lack of drive. A cheery thought indeed, isn't it? Have you ever asked a close friend or relative to summarize you in a few words? How did you feel when you heard their response? Were you happy thinking they understood you perfectly? Or did you feel reduced? Left wondering how even your closest relations could miss so much of who you are? This feeling is at the heart of Jean-Paul Sartre's famous quote, "Hell is other people." Sartre believed that each of us is incredibly complex. We carry fantasies, secrets, and fears that no one else knows, elements of ourselves that no one can truly understand. We are the feeling, thinking subjects of our own lives, trapped in our minds like prisoners in a tower. And yet, we must live alongside others. People see us, judge us, and define us. When you enter a room, others immediately make judgments about you. You become an object to them. They label you the funny one, the smart one, the awkward one. In an instant, they reduce you to a stereotype. You feel the sting of their judgment, and it's painful. Even those who know us best cannot fully capture the depth of our complexity. Our most intimate selves are overlooked, and we are simplified into something far less than we truly are. And so, we fight back against this reduction. We scream inwardly, "I'm more than that." But in the process, we start to see ourselves as others do. We internalize their judgments, feeling objectified, smaller, less real. In our hurt, we begin to objectify others in return. We simplify their complexities, label them, and reduce their personhood to make ourselves feel better. We soothe our bruised egos by diminishing others, reducing their significance so we can restore our own sense of importance. This is why Sartre said, "Hell is other people." Their judgments steal our personhood. They make us feel small, shallow, and unimportant. We want to shout, "I'm not always like that." But instead, we bite our tongues, afraid that speaking up would be seen as petty or defensive. In the end, we all face the challenge of being seen, judged, and reduced by others, but also of how we choose to see them. How do we balance the urge to protect ourselves with the need to truly see others? Nietzsche is often misunderstood as a nihilist, the man with the oversized mustache who shouted, "God is dead," and supposedly proclaimed that life is meaningless. But as you might guess, it's far more complex than that. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence actually portrays him as a life-affirming thinker, a pillar of existentialism, and perhaps even a modern therapist. In his 1882 work The Gay Science, Nietzsche asks us to imagine a demon who tells us, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy. Every thought and sigh, and everything unutterably small or great in your life will return to you in the same succession and sequence." Pause for a moment. How does this idea make you feel? Do you feel excitement, or does it fill you with dread? If your response is boredom or dread, Nietzsche would say you're living life as an object. You've become a passive witness to your own existence, perhaps bitter and cynical, simply going through the motions, longing to escape the pain and hurry through life. Nietzsche doesn't sugarcoat it. If this resonates with you, he sees you as a victim caught in a woe is me mentality. But Nietzsche doesn't leave us there.
He offers an antidote through his aphorism Amor fati, love your fate. The existential comfort we crave comes not from wishing things were different, but from accepting them as they are. We must not will backwards or endlessly wish we could change the past. Instead, we are called to love our fate, to embrace everything that has happened to us, our pain, our suffering, our joys, and our pleasures. These are what make us who we are. In essence, we must take pride in our mistakes and faults, for they are part of our journey. We are existing with and because of them. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence was not new. Many Eastern religions and ancient Greek Stoicism had already explored it, but it was Nietzsche who popularized it for a modern Western audience. Today, we might call this idea letting go, moving on, or que sera, but Nietzsche's idea goes deeper. It's not just about shrugging things off, it's about a positive vocal affirmation of your life. Love your fate. Amor fati. Do you ever feel as if your emotions shift from day to day? One moment, you might feel blissfully content, and the next, there's an unshakable feeling of dissatisfaction, as if you're longing for something bigger, something more. Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th-century Danish philosopher and widely considered the father of existentialism, would understand exactly what you're experiencing. He believed that philosophy in his time had lost its connection to the human experience. Instead of focusing on the individual's lived reality, philosophy had become obsessed with abstract metaphysics, reaching its esoteric heights in figures like Hegel. For Kierkegaard, philosophy should begin with the me, with introspection and reflection on the individual experience. Kierkegaard identified 3 spheres or stages of existence that guide the human condition through life: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. The aesthetic sphere is the lowest, representing a life focused purely on pleasure, desire, and self-fulfillment. It's the world of festivals, frivolity, and constant pursuit of gratification. For Kierkegaard, it didn't matter whether this desire was fulfilled by high culture, like Bach and caviar, or by more superficial pleasures, like binge drinking or pop music. Both forms of pleasure are just different ways to satisfy desire. But the aesthete inevitably grows bored of this. In the aftermath of the highs, the hangovers of life set in, and the quest for more begins. This leads the person to the ethical sphere, which is where life gains deeper meaning. Here, individuals seek community, morality, and a sense of connection with others. This is the sphere where we find joy in virtues like generosity and kindness, where we feel part of something bigger, whether it's a shared sport, hobby, or moral cause. It's the feeling of being connected to a community and to values that transcend the self. However, the highest and most meaningful stage, according to Kierkegaard, is the religious sphere. This is where a person experiences moments of indescribable, almost illogical passion. It's a higher calling, a compulsion to act in a way that makes sense only to the individual. These moments aren't about fitting into society or adhering to moral standards. They're deeply personal and cannot be fully understood by others, not even those closest to us. These moments of radical individuality and passionate movement are, for Kierkegaard, the most authentic and profound way to live. In these 3 stages, aesthetic, ethical, and religious, Kierkegaard offers a roadmap for understanding the shifts in our emotions and desires. Each stage represents a deeper and more meaningful way of living, ultimately calling us to face the world not just as we are, but as we can become. We all have a nemesis. It might not always be someone we think of in grand, dramatic terms, but we all have that one person or thing that we dislike with such passion, that, in a way, it defines who we are. What happens, though, if we're forced to live alongside that nemesis? What happens when the battle between us is unavoidable? When the clash of identities looms on the horizon? For the German philosopher G. W. F. Hegel, these clashes are what define us all. His famous master-slave dialectic has influenced philosophers, historians, and sociologists ever since, providing a profound insight into how we form our identities and self-consciousness. Hegel's philosophy can be notoriously difficult to understand, and he knew it. Upon his death in 1831, his supposed last words were, "There was only one man who ever understood me, and even he didn't understand me.
But despite the complexity of his ideas, Hegel gave us some brilliant insights that still resonate today. One of his most important concepts is how we come to know ourselves, not as isolated beings, but in relation to others. For Hegel, to be a person requires recognition. We only truly understand who we are when we are acknowledged by someone else. It's through the gaze of another person, a parent calling us by our name, a friend acknowledging us, a team assigning us a role, that we begin to form our identity. Without these relationships, we wouldn't exist as individuals. But what happens when these relationships are unequal? What if one person is more dominant than the other? Hegel believed that in many of our relationships, there is an inevitable clash, a struggle between equals that leads to one party becoming dominant over the other. The result of this struggle, Hegel argued, is a master-slave dynamic. The strong and the weak, the lord and the bondsman. The problem, however, is that neither party benefits from this relationship. The slave becomes objectified and alienated, their labor appropriated by the master. The master, too, is diminished. They may have power over the slave, but they also need the slave's recognition in order to feel validated. However, since they've reduced the slave to an object, they cannot accept the legitimacy of the slave's recognition. This leaves both parties trapped in a flawed dynamic. Ultimately, the slave, who is in the worst condition, will seek liberation. They will engage in a life-and-death struggle to free themselves, and in doing so, they will create a new relationship, one where both parties recognize their mutual dependence. This dynamic will eventually result in a stable, mature relationship built on give and take. While Hegel's abstract ideas might leave us wondering how this applies to real life, it's clear that his insight about power dynamics resonates today. His ideas were later expanded by thinkers like Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Foucault, who showed how Hegel's master-slave dialectic still shapes our understanding of social structures and relationships. Despite its complexity, Hegel's master-slave concept teaches us that no one truly benefits from domination and exploitation. Humans can only thrive when we recognize and respect each other. At what point do you decide to fight back? How many insults, injustices, or cruelties do you accept before you say, no more? Where do you draw the line between what's bearable and what's intolerable? For Albert Camus, that line, the point of final rebellion, says a lot about who we are. In his work, Camus grapples with nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless and purposeless. He asks, how do we be human in a world stripped of religious certainty and after Nietzsche's challenge to traditional values? For Camus, the key lies in knowing what you will not tolerate, what values you will defend at all costs. In his book The Rebel, 1951, Camus explores moments in life where we reach a point of no return, where we refuse to compromise. It's the moment when we stand by the part of ourselves that must always be defended. It's an affirmation of life, a declaration, this is what I will give and no more. The rebel is someone who commits to an inviolable point within themselves, something no other person can take away. It's the overworked employee telling their boss, I'm going home. It's the schoolchild refusing an unjust punishment, the victim of abuse leaving their partner, or the slave choosing to run. In essence, we all have a hill we're willing to die on. That line, that limit, defines our lives. It's a place where we draw a boundary and say, this is me and I will not be moved. This rebellion ties into Camus' concept of absurdity. He believed that the more we are denied, the more free and joyful we become. It's when we have nothing left to lose that we discover depths to ourselves that we might never have known. Our freedom is defined by how far it's denied. Interestingly, while Camus rejected absolute truths that dictate how we should live, in The Rebel he suggests certain unavoidable duties and obligations, ones we can't escape. The rebel is not a selfish egoist, although rebellion is often a personal act. Instead, the rebel affirms a sense of respect and solidarity with humanity as a whole. Camus even described man as metaphysical, meaning that there is a part of us that is beyond the physical world and unchangeable, a part that gives us our essence, rather than the existential belief that we are entirely free to change ourselves. So, the next time you say no, remember what your rebellion means.
It's not a negative act, it's a profound affirmation of life. It's the moment you define yourself, telling the world and yourself that this part of you cannot and will not be taken from you. When have you denied yourself something you wanted because it was not the done thing? Do you ever feel confined by the expectations, pressures, and labels others place on you? What roles do you play in your relationships, and do those roles liberate or entomb you? In her 1949 magnum opus The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir introduced groundbreaking ideas that have shaped both existentialism and modern feminism. De Beauvoir argued that we are not born with a predetermined essence, instead we create ourselves. We define both our self-identity, the way we see ourselves, and our social-facing identity, the way we want others to see us. This concept extends to womanhood, where de Beauvoir famously stated, "One is not born, but rather becomes, a woman." She contended that society imposes a set of expectations on women, how they should look, behave, and think. Often, women unconsciously fulfill these roles. While this societal role may not always be overtly negative or discriminatory, de Beauvoir argued that society frequently relegates women to the role of the second sex, positioning them as inferior or lesser compared to men. The man is the default, the norm, and the woman is seen as a variation. For de Beauvoir, accepting the role of the woman is an act of living in bad faith, a form of self-deception. It's a refusal to acknowledge your true capacity and power to define yourself. Adopting this socially constructed role not only perpetuates inequality, such as workplace discrimination, but also affects the language we use and the norms we insist upon. For example, consider the following questions. Does letting the man pay on a date reinforce the objectification of the woman? Should a proper woman only order a certain drink at a bar? Do we assume that women are more likely to be depressed because they are overrepresented on antidepressants, when the reality might be more complex? How does the fact that women still perform 75% of all unpaid labor affect the gender roles we perpetuate? Why do 90% of women not report sexual harassment on the subway? These are just a few examples of how societal norms shape and restrict women's lives, something Simone de Beauvoir highlighted in her work. By understanding how society creates and enforces a stereotype of the woman, we can begin to see how much we may indulge or project that stereotype ourselves. We all play our roles perfectly, but the question remains, do these roles define us, or do we define ourselves? We all aspire to be something, to be the best father, the best athlete, or the most knowledgeable fan of a beloved franchise. The problem with being human, though, is when our identities become boxes, roles, labels, and titles that confine us. People say, "This is Joanne, she's a cricketer," or "This is Mike, he's a dad to 2 beautiful boys." And in those few words, a cage of expectations closes around you. Suddenly, certain behaviors are expected. Mike can't complain about his kids, and Joanne can't admit she missed the game last night. Frantz Fanon, a French Martinique philosopher, understood this dynamic deeply. In his 1952 work Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon applied this concept of existentialism to the experience of being black. He recognized that labels and outwardly imposed identities suffocate the authentic self. For Fanon, the label of blackness is one of the most egregious forms of this oppression. But he argued that the issue of imposed identity affects all humans, though in different ways. The label of black is just one extreme case, but all of us struggle with labels that limit and diminish us. Fanon wrote, "The Negro enslaved by his inferiority, the white man enslaved by his superiority alike behave in accordance with a neurotic orientation." This means that both the black person caught in the inferiority imposed by racism and the white person caught in the superiority they are taught to uphold are both bound by these limiting beliefs. Fanon believed that for anyone to truly develop a sense of self, they need to engage with and be recognized by another self-consciousness. But in a racist society, the black person is denied this recognition. The white gaze objectifies the black person, reducing them to an object in the midst of other objects. The black person becomes acutely aware of their body, their skin, their difference in a way a white person never needs to consider.
They are pigeonholed, labeled, and reduced to names like Negro, constantly reminded of their status as other. This process often leads to two responses, both of which Fanon saw as problematic. Sometimes, a black person might embrace and celebrate their blackness, but Fanon warned that this could be just as objectifying as the way society has labeled them. He wrote, "In no way should I dedicate myself to the revival of an unjustly unrecognized Negro civilization. I will not make myself the man of any past." This response limits the person to a singular, imposed identity. Other times, the black person might attempt to become white, desiring to wear the livery that the white man has sewn for them. But Fanon pointed out the futility of this effort. It's an inauthentic way of living. It denies the person the ability to truly be themselves. Fanon's work doesn't offer a simple solution, but it highlights a universal human anxiety that transcends race. Yet, he makes it clear that this anxiety is not the same for everyone. There is a hierarchy in self-actualization. A white person might struggle with existential questions about their identity, but the black person is denied even the luxury of this struggle. In a racist society, the very ability to experience existential angst is withheld. Fanon's work forces us to confront how deeply our identities are shaped by society's labels, and how the struggle to define oneself is not universal. For those caught in systems of oppression, the ability to even question who they are is denied. Something broken can be profoundly beautiful. A courtyard of moss-covered sculptures, a grove of withered trees, or the ruins of a castle, these images evoke a sense of beauty that strikes deep within us, yet is hard to fully explain. The old, the decayed, the fractured, the mismatched, the gnarled, these things can carry a unique, sorrowful beauty. This is the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi. At its core, wabi-sabi is an encounter that recognizes and appreciates the imperfection and transience of life. It's about how we relate to this reality, how we see ourselves as part of this fleeting existence. While the Western aesthetic tradition, influenced by ancient Greece, has long emphasized ideals of beauty and perfection, wabi-sabi embraces the opposite, the impermanence, incompleteness, and fragility of everything. It's like comparing a marble statue of Adonis to a chipped teacup. One represents the ideal, and the other the reality of existence. Wabi-sabi is less about perfection and more about accepting the broken, the imperfect, and the transitory. Though the concept of wabi-sabi is often linked to design, such as in a crumbling ruin, a worn farmhouse table, or asymmetrical columns of a monument, it's not just about objects. Wabi-sabi is more a relationship between you, the viewer, and the object you are viewing. The object doesn't inherently possess wabi-sabi. Rather, it evokes it in us. When I find a cracked gravestone beautiful, it's because it reminds me of my own mortality, imperfection, and the fleeting nature of all things. For one person, wabi-sabi might be found in an old battle-scarred lion. For another, it might be in the music of Jeff Buckley or the final word of a novel. It's an experience that resonates differently for each individual. In Japan, there's a deep awareness of the changing seasons, so much so that there are 72 microseasons. Wabi-sabi connects to this awareness. It's about recognizing the inevitability of autumn and the cold of winter, savoring the vibrancy of spring and the peak of summer, all while acknowledging that these moments will eventually fade. All things, including ourselves, will scar, wither, and eventually fail, and wabi-sabi is about embracing that truth. So, the next time you encounter something broken, crooked, or imperfect, take a moment to appreciate the poignant beauty it holds. Nothing lasts forever, nothing is perfect, and the world itself reflects this everywhere. Thanks for watching. Why do people enjoy scary movies? Why do the best movies of all time often leave us in tears, hearts heavy with emotion? After all, fear and sadness are biologically wired into us as emotions meant to protect us. Fear keeps us safe from danger, and sadness reminds us of loss or the need for connection.
So why do we intentionally seek out these feelings in our free time? Aristotle, in his work Poetics, c. 335 BC, thought he had the answer, and he called it catharsis. The ancient Greeks placed a high value on moderation and balance, especially when it came to being rational and reasonable citizens. Hippocrates, the great physician, believed that illness came from an imbalance of bodily fluids, what he called humors. Aristotle extended this idea to the soul, arguing that our thoughts and feelings also require balance. Catharsis, for Aristotle, is the process through which we experience intense, often unpleasant emotions like fear and pity, only to purge them from our psyche. According to him, tragedy is the greatest form of catharsis because the emotions it evokes leave us feeling emotionally relieved and free from pent-up pressure. We can feel the effects of catharsis in our own lives. Why do we feel so much better after a good cry? Or after a long, exhausting run, or even a night of drinking when stress becomes overwhelming? It's the release of tension. It's a safe way to vent our emotions, an acceptable outlet to let off steam. In fact, in ancient Greece, the medicinal benefits of catharsis were so widely acknowledged that citizens didn't have to pay to attend the theater, they were even paid to go as it was considered a public benefit. The idea was simple: it's better to watch a tragedy unfold on stage and safely indulge our emotions than to act them out in real life. It's better to experience the fear of Prometheus' torments on stage than to lash out at a friend. And, in Aristotle's view, it's definitely better to watch Oedipus unknowingly sleep with his mother than to live out such tragedies in our own lives. However, catharsis has come under recent debate. Some believe Aristotle intended catharsis to purge only negative emotions like fear, anger, and hate in order to restore a healthy emotional balance. Others think he meant catharsis to purge all emotion. This view makes sense, especially considering how Greek philosophers often emphasized rationality over emotion or reason over passion, though Aristotle himself was less averse to emotion than his teacher, Plato. For us today, there is a deep truth in the concept of catharsis. We gravitate toward dramas, tragedies, horrors, and even ghost trains because they provide an emotional release. They help us feel better, lighter. So, if you're feeling pent up, restless, or overwhelmed, maybe it's time to embrace catharsis. Let it all out. There's a certain beauty in the power of nature, a thunderous storm, the vastness of a mountain, or the immensity of a churning sea. When we experience these moments, we often feel a mix of awe and insignificance. For Immanuel Kant, these feelings were what he called the sublime, and they were truly wonderful. Kant believed that all experiences of beauty could be divided into two aesthetic categories, the beautiful and the sublime. Humans can respond to both, but each in different measures and in different contexts. Broadly speaking, the beautiful is characterized as pleasant, pretty, and joyful. It's the fragrant rose, the playful lamb, or the dewy meadow things that delight us with their harmony and charm. On the other hand, the sublime is deeper, more meaningful, and profound. It's the puffing bison, the raging tide, and the deeply carved fjords, things that evoke a sense of wonder and vastness that leave us feeling small in comparison. Kant didn't stop at the natural world. He extended this theory to people and relationships as well. For example, we all know the beautiful person, the quick-witted, charismatic individual who lights up a room full of fun but often with a sense of shallowness. Then there's the sublime person, dignified, honest, the one we turn to for advice. They're reliable and supportive, but sometimes they can seem morose, overly serious, or a bit boring. For Kant, the sublime personality was much more valuable, perhaps because he saw himself as that type. Kant's ideas, however, took a turn for the worse when he applied them to gender and race. He argued that women were beautiful while men were sublime, and in his more troubling passages, he classified certain nations in similarly problematic terms. According to Kant, the French were the beautiful ones, dandies, fops, and lovers. The English, however, were sublime, as were the Spaniards with their adventurous conquests. He reserved a particularly offensive view for African people, claiming that the Negroes of Africa have by nature no feeling that rises above the ridiculous. These deeply racist and dated views are hard to read today, yet they were part of Kant's broader philosophy. Despite these flaws, Kant's basic distinction between the beautiful and the sublime still holds some intuitive appeal. We can all relate, in some way, to the experience of beauty or the profound sense of awe in nature. Whether we walk through a rose garden or listen to the rain pounding at our door, we all encounter moments of beauty and moments of the sublime that stir us in unique ways. There's something magical about music. It has the power to lift us out of ourselves, out of our everyday lives, and into a place of pure experience. But where's this place? It's as if music takes us to an egoless realm where nothing exists but the music and the moment. Have you ever noticed how the language we use to describe music often borders on the religious? It's inexpressible. There's a sense of something greater, something beyond the self, and it's hard to explain this feeling through natural or evolutionary terms. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this feeling intimately. He wrote extensively about the transcendent and mystical aspect of music. While most forms of art represent something, paintings are of landscapes or people, novels explore relationships, and poems use metaphor and symbolism, music is different. What does music represent? What does a composer or musician aim at when they write a song? Schopenhauer famously said, "Music stands quite apart. In it we do not recognize a copy." Music is not about something else, it is for music's sake. For Schopenhauer, music does not represent an object in the world. Instead, it expresses the very fabric of our being, the dynamic, striving life force that he calls the will. Music echoes in our soul because it perfectly embodies our nature. And not just human nature, but all of nature, which Schopenhauer believes also has a will. The reason we find musical resolutions like the perfect cadence where a chord must return to its tonic so satisfying is because it mirrors the striving of our own will. The resolution feels good because it reflects the underlying drive of existence. As Schopenhauer delves deeper, he argues that music's four-part harmony reflects different aspects of the world. The bass represents the mineral world and scientific forces like gravity. The tenor corresponds to the plant kingdom, the alto to animals, and the soprano, carrying the melody, embodies the unrestrained freedom and intellectually enlightened will of humans. For Schopenhauer, music truly is everything. This leads him to a powerful conclusion. Music invites us to surrender our ego and individuality to become a pure, will-less subject and experience a state of unbroken, blissful peace. Music, for Schopenhauer, is an escape from our will. It dissolves the self, allowing us to experience a transcendent contentment, a blissful state where we are free from the pressures of desire and striving. In this way, music becomes not just an art form, but a path to liberation, an invitation to step outside of ourselves and into a space of pure, peaceful transcendence. Unless you're an artist, you might not have given much thought to your relationship with colors. But consider this, would you rather be described as pink or gray? Which smells better, purple or brown? Who would win in a fight between red and yellow? Who would make a better party guest, blue or green? Colors aren't just things we see, they're wrapped in associations, metaphors, and moods. They shape our attitude towards everything we experience. And Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was one of the first scholars to truly explore the depth of this connection. Goethe's theory of colors 1810 was considered by him to be his best work. While parts of the book challenge Isaac Newton's science of light and, in some cases, gets it wrong, it goes beyond that by offering a rich exploration of what colors mean to us. Goethe, regarded as the greatest writer in the German language, infused his work with poetic prose, capturing how colors evoke feelings and associations. For example, Goethe described red as having a grave and magnificent effect, yellow as having a serene, gay, softly exciting character, and blue as cold, evoking the sense of shade and emptiness. In his view, a blue room might seem larger, but also empty and cold, almost like feng shui, but with a 19th century German twist. In English, we have only 11 basic color terms: green, gray, red, etc. Other colors, like burgundy or amber, are linked to specific objects, such as the wine or the precious stone. Pink was once associated only with certain flowers, and even the color orange takes its name from the fruit. This shows that many of our color words are actually metaphors tied to historical use and the feelings associated with those objects. Different cultures categorize colors in various ways, and even within a single culture, two people might disagree on the nuances of shades. Can you tell the difference between crimson and scarlet? azure, and cyan? And interestingly, children under 6 are surprisingly poor at color identification. So it turns out that even colors aren't free from the grasp of philosophers. Our minds identify the world's hues not just as shades, but as imbued with mood and feeling. Every experience we have is filtered through our unique color biases. Money is a strange thing when you really think about it. You hand over a piece of grubby paper, and in return, a farmer, chemist, or tailor gives you something real and tangible. The entire world subscribes to this story that these bits of paper or metal hold value beyond their material worth. In short, money is a collective myth. Yuval Harari, the Israeli historian, explores this idea in his book Sapiens, where he argues that these collective myths are one of the key factors that have allowed Homo sapiens to progress to where we are today. We live in a post-existentialist world. Nietzsche famously declared, "God is dead," and Sartre claimed, "Existence precedes essence." We no longer accept absolute truths built into the fabric of the universe. There is no religion, morality, or belief that doesn't, in some way, depend on faith. Yet, despite this, we still live by these very beliefs. The nihilists and radical skeptics are few and far between outside of philosophy circles. Why is that? Harari argues that it's because creating and following these myths is at the root of our humanity. These myths are so ingrained in our lives that it's often hard to see them for what they are. Take the idea of a nation as an example. The boundaries of a nation are just lines on a map, often drawn recently and then redrawn or erased by people who believed that the myth of nationalism was worth spinning. Does a bird care if it flies from France into Germany? Yet, a Serb may risk their life to save another Serb based on nothing but this fiction. And then there's money, perhaps the most concrete example of collective myths in action. We don't think twice about it because we've all completely bought into the myth. I assume that you'll accept this piece of paper in exchange for something far more valuable, and you do without question. There are, of course, harder myths to swallow. Concepts like human rights, religions, political ideologies, and ideas like equality, democracy, and fairness are all myths too. But if we want to continue believing in them, we must commit and recommit to them over and over again. If Harari is right, our ability to create and commit to these myths is what has allowed us to be successful both individually and collectively. We don't just describe reality, we create realities. And in doing so, we're able to cooperate, strive, and progress together. The hero wakes up next to the lover, her eyes heavy from not enough sleep. She checks her phone to see a call from her father, the caregiver, checking up on her. She ignores it. At work, she attends a meeting with her boss, the magician, and later shares lunch with the jester, who's obviously hungover, and the explorer, who's once again talking about his hiking trip. When she gets home at night, she transforms into the shadow. Welcome to Jung's archetypes. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst and former Freud follower, made a major departure from Freud's focus on the personal unconscious. Jung concerned himself with the collective unconscious, a concept where universal structures govern behaviors within any social group. These structures, or archetypes, are the accepted ways communities allow their members to behave. Jung likened them to a character selection screen in a game. Who will you play today? The maiden, all innocence and purity? The animal, connected to the natural world? The magician, wise and thoughtful? The jester, laughing at life's absurdities? Jung proposed that these 12 archetypes are so deeply embedded in the human psyche that we externalize them through stories, myths, songs, and traditions. Think of Frodo, Harry Potter, Elsa, and Luke Skywalker as the hero. Gandalf, Dumbledore, Grandpappy, and Yoda embody the sage. Pippin, Hagrid, Olaf, and C-3PO are the child. These archetypes are larger than life, so much so that we elevate them to the status of gods, worshipping figures like Loki and Hermes as the trickster or Aphrodite and Venus as the lover. Even in Christianity, we see archetypes. Mary as the maiden, God as the sage, and Satan as the shadow.
It's important to note that while these archetypes are widely used in modern culture and marketing, they aren't exactly how Jung defined them. Jung gave broader titles to his archetypes, which weren't as rigidly defined as the role-playing style names we often use today. Nonetheless, the core idea remains. We see these archetypes everywhere because they are fundamental to our shared experience. Jung's theory is especially relevant today. We all feel as though there are prescribed roles and behaviors for us to follow, a limited set of identities we can choose from. But just like the existentialists, Jung believed that true happiness and freedom come when we transcend these archetypes and embrace individualization, when we break free from predefined roles and forge our own unique identity. So, the next time you're faced with that character selection screen in life, remember, the power to define who you are rests with you. Create your own character and let your true self shine.
What makes humans beautifully absurd? The time, money, and effort we devote to the pointless. We take things so seriously. A fan will stand in the rain for hours just to catch a glimpse of their favorite pop star. A stamp collector might spend a month's wages to finish a 1931 Weimar collection. A gamer will sacrifice sleep, chasing that elusive win on God mode. But what's the point of all of it? Why do we do it? Why so serious? Behind Christopher Nolan's Joker 2019 and the original DC Comics character lies an absurdity that threatens the very reason for our existence. Of all the Joker's tricks, his mocking nihilism might just be the most dangerous. The Joker lives in a world where there are no values, no truths, only chaos and meaninglessness. He sees society as fragile, ready to descend into madness with just the smallest nudge. He believes that all our precious morals and codes will crumble at the first sign of trouble. He exposes how pathetic our attempts to control things really are. To the Joker, there is no order to the world. We are nothing more than pawns in a grand, meaningless play. He's an agent of chaos, convinced that all our so-called civilization is just one terrible act away from complete anarchy. Psychologically, he believes that we are all just one traumatic experience away from losing our sanity. Madness is like gravity, he says. All it takes is a little push. This nihilism echoes the ideas of Nietzsche, who argued that, in a world free from God and religion, we are left floating in a subjective void. Truth, he said, amounts to nothing more than power. Like the Joker, Nietzsche saw a world that leaves us confused, disoriented, and continually falling into nothingness. His solution? We must affirm life on our terms. Or, as the Joker puts it, the only sensible way to live in this world is without rules. The rot at the heart of the Joker's philosophy is how hard it is to escape. Camus, in his 1942 essay The Myth of Sisyphus, suggested we confront life with an absurd, playful insouciance. Exactly like the Joker does. He's embraced the void, the nothingness of a world without meaning. And he says, smile because it's easier than explaining what is killing you inside. It's a bleak, nihilistic vision of the world, but it's one we can't easily dismiss. After all, in a world that seems devoid of meaning, what else can we do but smile? Have you ever sat down to watch a movie or read a book only to look up and realize that hours have suddenly passed? Have you ever had an experience so immersive that you completely lost track of time, escaping the world and, perhaps, even yourself? These moments of total absorption are what Friedrich Nietzsche refers to as the Dionysian in his exploration of art and aesthetics. Nietzsche, drawing heavily from the ancient Greeks and Schopenhauer, believed that all culture and art can be divided into two categories, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Each represents a fundamental aspect of human nature. Different people may resonate with one more than the other, but both are innate to us. The Apollonian is defined by sharp clarity, order, and rationality. Think of architecture with its geometric beauty or sculpture with its clean contours. These are the pinnacle of the Apollonian. It's all about neatness, structure, and methodical thinking. A person who resonates with the Apollonian might be logically minded, preferring textbooks over fiction, science over the arts, and feeling most at ease in an organized, predictable environment. They like things tidy and ordered, like a perfectly completed Sudoku puzzle or the intricacies of artificial intelligence. On the other hand, the Dionysian represents chaos, fervor, and wild intensity. Nietzsche considered music to be the highest form of the Dionysian as it can pull you into a rapturous state of mind that feels almost like madness. The Dionysian is the 3-hour reading binge, the heady euphoria of a rave, or the blissful stupor of watching Netflix for hours without realizing it. It's about losing yourself in the moment, experiencing life in its purest and most intense form. A Dionysian person might be spontaneous, creative, and wild. They act before thinking, jumping before looking. They often embrace disorder, and while they may be unreliable at times, they are full of life, energy, and creativity. For Nietzsche, the greatest and purest form of art is the union of both the Dionysian and the Apollonian, as seen in the ancient Greek tragedies. However, Nietzsche placed greater value on the Dionysian, believing that it embodies the essence of being human. Its passion and intensity over robotic abstraction, embracing the fullness of life rather than just its order. Of course, trying to categorize all art into just 2 boxes oversimplifies things, much like the pseudoscientific debates over left brain versus right brain thinking. But there is undeniable appeal in Nietzsche's ideas. There's a clear difference in how we experience a ballet versus a jive, or a cathedral versus a novel. And in recognizing these differences, we open ourselves up to appreciating art through a new lens, something that can never be a bad thing. Have you ever watched an obscure foreign language film and thought, what the hell did I just watch? Or maybe encountered a piece of art that felt so alien that you simply couldn't make sense of it? Culture is so ingrained in our daily lives, so routine, that we often don't pause to consider just how artificial it really is. With a few exceptions, every movie we watch, every book we read, follows a similar form and theme. They also establish certain norms and values, and often we don't even notice it. This is exactly what German philosopher Theodor Adorno saw in what he called the culture industry. He believed it was dangerous, oppressive, and ultimately dulling. In the early 20th century, Marxist thinkers across Europe grappled with a question: why hadn't the working classes, the proletariat, risen up to overthrow the oppressive bourgeoisie, as Marx had predicted? All the necessary conditions seemed to be in place, but the revolution never came. Adorno's answer was to point to modern culture. He argued that the culture industry, the mass production of entertainment and media, had created a false consciousness. In Adorno's view, capitalism had instilled certain values as sacred and untouchable, reinforcing them through every movie, book, and song. These values, he claimed, sold the capitalist lie over and over, making it so deeply embedded that even the oppressed saw no way out. But what was this false consciousness? What was this lie? Adorno agreed with Marx that there is a fetishism of commodities, the belief that everything in the world can be reduced to its exchange value. In other words, we see the world in terms of objects to be used, and everything has a price. The lie capitalism spins is that life is inherently self-interested and greedy. So, every movie that tells the rags to riches story of an underdog overcoming adversity, every song that celebrates wealth and luxury, and every book featuring high society living is reinforcing this mindset. Slowly, drip by drip, this culture instills the belief that value comes from wealth and that greed is good. All of this is part of the culture industry, a system that has, according to Adorno, dulled the desire for revolution, making people accept the world as it is and say, ah well, can't be helped. For Adorno, the only way to combat this was through a culture war. Art, he argued, must be reclaimed from the commercial machine it has become. It should challenge, resist, and empower, not numb, stupefy, or infantilize. Art should make us angry because there's so much to be angry about. You've thought long and hard about it, and now you're left with only 2 choices: do a hugely evil thing or let a far worse evil happen. What do? Is an evil action worse than an even greater and more terrible inaction? This is the dilemma facing Thanos, the nearly invincible eternal deviant from Titan in the Marvel Universe. Thanos has spent years contemplating the fate of the universe and reached a sobering conclusion. Life is on a one-way track to inevitable death and misery. He argued this universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. Wars would rage, children would starve, and the universe would wither under the strain of overpopulation. His solution? It needs correcting. I'm the only one who knows that. At least, I'm the only one with the will to act on it. Thanos faces two choices. Use his godlike powers to eliminate half of all life in the universe to restore balance, or stand idly by and watch everything deteriorate into a suffocating dystopia. This dilemma closely mirrors the trolley problem, a famous ethical thought experiment presented by philosopher Philippa Foot in the 1960s. The trolley problem forces you to choose between turning a runaway train to kill one person or allowing it to kill 5. Foot's solution, based on the doctrine of double effect from Aquinas, suggests that an action is wrong if the evil consequences were intended, but permissible if the evil was foreseen yet unavoidable. By this logic, Thanos' actions are morally wrong. The primary evil, killing half the universe, cannot be justified no matter how much good it might bring. But is it really that simple? Thanos' choice comes down to a conflict between rules and outcomes, the greater good versus strict moral doctrines. In some cases, such as killing a hungry wolf to protect a group of children, the morally right choice is clear. But what if eliminating half of all life results in a vast improvement in the quality of life for the remaining population? Why is that wrong? So, who's right? If evil only requires good men to do nothing, then, according to Thanos, he may be the only good person in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you had the power of the Infinity Stones, what would you do? We hardly ever focus on the empty space around us. For example, consider the space that surrounds and frames these words. It's much easier to overlook the importance of space until it's taken away. Every letter, word, shape, and object is defined by the space that surrounds it. More than that, every idea, relationship, and thought in our lives is defined by the space we give it. This is the essence of the Japanese concept of ma, or negative space. While its origins are in Chinese Taoism, it became an essential part of Japanese philosophy, especially in design, and was popularized by the architect Isozaki in the 1970s. Ma is the space that we give to disconnected things to allow them to exist and make sense. In design, it might refer to the space between two shapes, creating balance and harmony. Artists, from painters to interior designers, give careful thought to the role of space. But ma is just as significant in philosophical terms. In Japan, temples are often placed at the end of a long, arduous path, frequently up hills or along unpaved roads. The journey itself is seen as a necessary clearing of the mind before reaching the temple. It's about creating mental space. In Japanese conversations, long pauses and unsaid words are common, which can make Western participants feel awkward. But in Japan, attentive listening and reflection are valued just as much as speaking or filling awkward silences. These moments of pause are examples of ma. Ma recognizes that space and silence have power of their own. A meaningful conversation often happens not in the rush of words, but in the silent moments, when we take the time to reflect on what's been said. Great insights don't emerge from talking over one another, but from those moments of quiet reflection, hours or even years later, when a thought finally takes root. Ma is the water that makes these ideas grow. Today, we use phrases like mental space or downtime, which capture an essential element of ma. But ma is everywhere. It's the void that defines a whole, the gap that separates the individual from the crowd, and the white space that lets you read this sentence. It's not just an absence or nothingness, but rather the garden from which everything grows. Eventually, we'll all grow old. We can fight it, delay it, or deny it, but still, everything we proudly flaunt will one day wither and fade. And so, here's a question. What does it mean to love someone if we only meet them when we're young and beautiful? When we commit to someone, through words or actions, what happens when their body changes with age? This is the very question Plato considered when he wrote about the nature of love. Plato's theory of love is framed within his broader view of the body and soul.
According to Plato, humans are simply souls trapped or encased in a body. The soul, he believed, is our purest nature. It allows us to transcend this illusionary world and contemplate the true, perfect reality, which he called the world of forms. The soul is our window to truth. Understanding this, Plato proposed that love can come in two forms: earthly, or vulgar, love, and divine, or pure love. Vulgar love, Plato argued, is materialistic, vain, and shallow. It's rooted in attraction, sexual desire, and lust. This love is concerned only with physical pleasure, and as our bodies change, when skin sags and hair turns gray, this love fades away. Today, we might call this infatuation or simple attraction. It's the love of the body. On the other hand, pure love is the recognition of another's soul. It's seeing their truest, deepest self. This love takes no notice of the physical body's changes. It's constant, loyal, and devoted, regardless of what life does to the outer shell. It's a commitment to an essence beyond all physical modifications. It's the close embrace of two spirits. It's the love of the soul. Today, we often associate platonic love with an asexual or non-romantic bond. It's the desire to see the other person flourish and to bring out the best in them. While Plato didn't explicitly exclude sexual desire, he understood love as the recognition of the soul, and sometimes sex can celebrate this through the body. So, if you find yourself old, fragile, gray, and wrinkled, and you're lucky enough to hold hands with someone who cares not at all for the changes in your appearance, think of Plato's love. True love, according to Plato, isn't blind, it's piercingly insightful. It sees beyond the surface, beyond the facade. It's the embrace and companionship of two souls united in their journey despite the inevitable transformations of the body.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.